There's a wall near the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. It's been there for a while now, covered in graffiti and hand-painted slogans. One of them reads, in Spanish, "Football belongs to the people." Another says, "They're playing dirty in the World Cup of pillaging." That wall is in the neighborhood of Santa Ursula Coapa, an indigenous community of 10,000 people that sits in the shadow of the Azteca, separated from the stadium by a stretch of road in a distance of experience that no amount of renovation work has closed. These are people who can hear the construction from their homes, who have watched the water pressure in their taps drop as real estate development drew on the same aquifer that their community has relied on for generations, who attended meeting after meeting with local officials and received, at the end of April, not a single signed agreement in response to their demands. 13 days from now, the opening ceremony of the 2026 FIFA World Cup will take place in that same stadium, the most historic football venue on Earth, the ground where Pelé lifted the trophy in 1970 and Maradona scored the goal of the century in 1986, and the people who live next to it have painted the words "FIFA Go Home" on the wall outside. That image is the starting point for a conversation that football hasn't fully had yet about what it really means when a backlash against a World Cup isn't just online noise or a petition or a debate in a football federation boardroom, when it's people with inadequate water supply and threatened land rights whose community existed before that stadium was built in 1966, asking what the biggest sporting event in human history is actually delivering to them. That's one strand of the backlash. Let's follow the others, because they run from the streets of Mexico City all the way to a quarantine hotel in Belgium, where the Democratic Republic of Congo's football team is waiting to find out whether they can enter a World Cup that begins in less than 2 weeks. Let's start by mapping where the resistance is coming from, because it isn't one movement, it isn't coordinated, it doesn't have a single voice or a single demand. It's more complicated than that, and more interesting. In Mexico, the backlash is rooted in the ground, literally. In Mexico City, the Azteca renovation project, part of a 2 billion peso stadium upgrade, was accompanied by a real estate development called Conjunto Estadio Azteca. In 2019, the stadium's part owner secured a private concession to a well that the local community had historically relied on. Residents say that since then, their water supply has become increasingly unreliable, regular outages, dropping pressure, a community of 10,000 people watching an infrastructure built for a global spectacle draw on the same water table that their daily lives depend on. In July of last year, hundreds of people took to the streets of southern Mexico City in an anti-gentrification march. It was the second in a series of mobilizations. In Guadalajara, another host city, the Luz de Esperanza collective has been clear in saying they're not opposed to football. What they're opposed to is public spending allocated to making cities look better for visitors, while serious and long-standing community problems go unaddressed. And in Mexico City, families searching for missing loved ones are using the global attention of the World Cup as a platform to make the crisis of disappearances visible to the rest of the world. That's not a football story, but it exists because of the football. Amnesty International published a full report in March of this year titled "Humanity Must Win: Defending Rights, Tackling Repression at the 2026 FIFA World Cup." In it, they described the World Cup's arrival in Mexico as triggering a series of protests from residents dealing with disruptions to water supplies, land access, rising costs, and gentrification linked to infrastructure development. And they raised a specific concern about how Mexico's security mobilization for the tournament is militarized in nature, and that if protests occurred during the event itself, the response could escalate in ways that create international attention for all the wrong reasons. This is the World Cup arriving in Mexico City, not as a welcome guest, as something more complicated, something that has genuinely improved infrastructure in some areas and genuinely damaged the quality of life in others, something that splits people who live within a kilometer of each other, those who benefit from the investment and those who lose the water.
Now let's move to DR Congo, because this story, which broke 6 days ago, is one of the most extraordinary situations in the history of any World Cup, and it's happening right now, in real time, with 13 days on the clock. DR Congo qualified for this World Cup on March 31st. They beat Jamaica in an intercontinental playoff final, with Axel Tuanzebe scoring in extra time to deliver DR Congo their first World Cup appearance since 1974. 52 years between appearances. Their captain, Cedric Bakambu, stood on the pitch after the final whistle and called on his country to use the qualification as a tool for national unity to end the war in the East. An extraordinary moment. A team carrying the weight of a nation fractured by conflict, celebrating a football result that felt briefly like something beyond sport. And then, the Ebola outbreak arrived.
The Bundibugyo strain of Ebola was confirmed in DR Congo. Last week, the World Health Organization raised the risk level for that outbreak to very high at national level and declared it a public health emergency of international concern. By that point, more than 900 suspected cases had been recorded and over 200 projected fatalities. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control issued a ban on entry to the United States for all foreign nationals who had been in Congo, Uganda, or South Sudan within the past 3 weeks. That ban directly affects DR Congo's World Cup delegation, not because the players are in Congo, most of them are based in European clubs, but because the team officials who handle logistics, administration, and operational support had been traveling to and from the country. Those officials, when they departed for the team's training camp in Belgium, became subject to the 21-day quarantine requirement before they can enter the United States. 21 days. The World Cup begins in 13. The mathematics are immediately visible. The team had planned a 3-day trip back to Kinshasa next week, a celebratory homecoming send-off before heading to their first World Cup in half a century. That trip has been cancelled. The training camp in Belgium continues. The Federation has confirmed the squad is maintaining its preparation schedule, playing a friendly against Denmark on June 3rd and another against Chile in Spain on June 9th. They're doing everything right. They're managing the situation professionally and without complaint. But DR Congo has also done something that tells you how real the practical problem is. They have formally asked FIFA to reimburse supporters who bought World Cup tickets and can now no longer travel, given the U.S. entry ban on nationals from affected regions. Their fans, who followed this team through qualifying and saved money for tickets to watch their country's first World Cup in over 50 years, face a ban from the host nation's territory. FIFA has been asked to make those supporters whole. That request, a football federation formally asking FIFA to reimburse ticket holders because a health emergency beyond anyone's control has made attendance impossible, is without precedent at any World Cup in the modern era. DR Congo is in Group K, alongside Portugal, Colombia, and Uzbekistan. Their matches will be played in Houston. Under current arrangements, their delegation must maintain a bubble in Belgium for the full 21-day period before they can travel to Houston and enter the United States. The timeline is possible, but narrow. It requires everything to go right. It requires the bubble to hold. It requires no further complications. And the football world is watching. Now, let's talk about the fan boycott picture, because it's worth updating for today, May 29th, 13 days out. One of the biggest questions about this tournament is whether the backlash has moved from conversation into action. The Facebook group, Boycott FIFA World Cup 2026 in USA, has over 25,800 members. On X, Instagram, and Reddit, the hashtag and related discussions carry thousands of posts pledging to stay away from American matches, with some fans committing to not watching the tournament at all on television. That last group is small. Most people who boycott the stadiums won't boycott their screens. Football is too embedded for that. But the stadium-level boycott, the decision simply not to travel, is measurable in the data. Airline bookings from Europe to the United States for the tournament period are 14% below the same period last year, in a year when the dollar is weaker against the euro and the trip is theoretically cheaper. Hotel occupancy projections across American host cities are running below expectations in almost every market. Visit Seattle reported international visitor projections 17% lower than initially modeled. Two-thirds of New York City hotels surveyed by the American Hotel and Lodging Association reported softer than expected World Cup demand.
In Kansas City, roughly 85% of hotels are tracking below their projections. The secondary ticket market has reflected this. Average resale prices for group stage matches fell 23% between mid-April and mid-May, with 87 of 91 American and Canadian fixtures seeing their entry price drop. The market had been set at a level that assumed a travel demand which hasn't fully materialized. Where is FIFA in all of this? The organization has maintained its position consistently. Infantino opened the FIFA Congress in Vancouver in late April with a direct confirmation of Iran's participation, saying it loud and clear as a rebuke to anyone suggesting otherwise. He has met with senior officials. He defended the market-based pricing model, at one point asking why anyone would be surprised by U.S. event prices, comparing them to other American entertainment costs. He presided over the launch of FIFA Pass, the visa prioritization system for ticket-holding fans from complicated countries. He has, from his position, been active.
But Amnesty International's March report said explicitly that FIFA had not made meaningful efforts to use its leverage with host governments to push back on policies affecting fans and players. The Council on Foreign Relations, in an April analysis, noted that the 2026 games are the first to have human rights criteria embedded in the bidding process, and that the gap between those criteria and the tournament's actual conditions represents a test that the criteria have not passed. The players themselves have been largely quiet. Jackson Irvine of Australia, who was at this tournament, was one of the rare exceptions, speaking publicly and using his own name to say FIFA had undermined its own human rights policy. Most players, understandably, have kept the focus on the football. They qualified. They're here. The tournament is in 13 days. What else is there to do but prepare? And that brings us to the hardest question this backlash raises. Not whether it's legitimate, it clearly is in its many different forms, but whether it changes anything. Whether 174,000 Dutch signatures and the graffiti on a wall in Santa Ursula Cuapa and a DR Congo's ticket refund request and a 14% drop in European flight bookings and Amnesty International's report and the protests at the Azteca, whether any of it moves FIFA. History suggests the answer is yes, eventually, but not quickly and rarely for this tournament. The changes that Qatar 2022 drove in FIFA's approach to human rights in hosting bids, specifically the requirement for human rights criteria to be embedded in the process, which is what makes 2026 the first tournament to be tested against those criteria, those changes came from sustained multi-year pressure. They didn't arrive before Qatar's World Cup. They arrived because of it. If 2026 follows the same pattern, some of what's happening now, the DR Congo ticket situation, the fan access barriers, the community protests in Mexico, will inform how FIFA structures 2030 and beyond. That's cold comfort to the residents of Santa Ursula Cuapa who are already without adequate water. It's cold comfort to Congolese fans who bought tickets and now face a ban from the host country. But it may be the realistic mechanism through which the backlash produces change. What is certain is that the football itself, the matches, the players, the drama, will begin to pull focus from June 11th. That's what football always does. You can have every reservation in the world about a tournament and still find yourself, 90 minutes into a match in the second week, completely absorbed, because the game itself is honest in a way that the governance around it often isn't. When Mbappe runs at a defense, or when Holland turns a goalkeeper inside out, or when some small nation achieves something nobody expected, the argument for being there, for watching, for caring, reasserts itself without asking permission. But this time, for this World Cup, the argument for caring is carrying more weight than usual, because the backlash is not fringe. It's residents next to the Azteca. It's 52 years of Congolese football fans being told their team is welcome, but they might not be. It's a quarantine hotel in Belgium. It's a petition with 174,000 names. It's the most decorated football journalist organizations on earth saying in official reports that the commitments made when this tournament was awarded are not being honored. Do you think the football will override all of it? It has before, and it might again. But I'd genuinely like to know how you're sitting with it 13 days out. Are you watching this tournament with the same feeling you've had at every World Cup before it?
Or is there something different this time? Something that the backlash has planted that won't entirely go away when the first ball is kicked? Leave your answer in the comments. These are the conversations that deserve to happen, and this channel is the right place for them.